Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the psychology behind a very specific, yet literally universal human experience, the overthinker's cycle. We're going to unpack exactly why so many of us constantly replay, dissect, and just totally overthink conversations way after they've ended. Have you ever walked away from a chat, gotten back to your car, and suddenly found your brain hitting the rewind button? Maybe it was a high-stakes meeting where you felt a bit out of your depth, or honestly, just an offhand comment to the barista making your morning coffee. Regardless of the scale, you start playing that interaction over and over in your head. You're wondering what you said, how you stood, and what the other person actually meant by their totally neutral expression. Well, psychology tells us this mental loop actually serves a highly complex purpose. It usually starts exactly like this. You've just finished talking to someone, the interaction is totally over, you've said your goodbyes, and you're finally alone. And then, almost like an involuntary reflex, your brain fires off this completely uninvited question. Did that sound weird? Instantly, you start doubting the perfectly normal, incredibly routine words that just came out of your mouth. The seed of doubt is planted. But before you can even rationally answer that first question, the mental spiral hits the gas. It hits you with another harsh self-critique. Did I say too much? Did I overshare? Wait, was I rambling? The questions just start firing. The doubt compounds, and suddenly, the memory of that casual conversation violently shifts into this high-stakes, highly critical interrogation. And then comes the ultimate fear. Did I make it awkward? Now you're entirely trapped in a relentless mental loop. You are absolutely exhausting yourself over what was, in all likelihood, a completely mundane interaction that the other person has already forgotten about. So why does our brain do this to us? Why can't we just walk away and move on with our day? Section 1, the post-conversations spiral. The core of this issue is that, as psychology shows us, even though an interaction is completely over and fundamentally cannot be changed, the mind compulsively revisits the event anyway. You replay the talk, but you don't just replay it exactly as it happened, right? You start imagining better responses. You picture different, ideal reactions. We've literally all been there. You're standing in the shower 3 days later, and suddenly, boom, you come up with the absolute perfect, witty comeback or the most articulate response to a question you completely fumbled on Tuesday. You start obsessively drafting alternate realities for conversation that is completely closed. And here's the wild psychological revelation behind that behavior. This mental replay, it's not just an exercise in self-torture. It actually serves a distinct emotional purpose. It creates what psychologists call a false sense of control. By revisiting the interaction and imagining a better outcome, your brain is trying to simulate having power over a situation that simply cannot be altered. It's a deeply fascinating coping mechanism designed entirely to manage the sheer discomfort of the unchangeable past. Section 2, searching for social mistakes. Psychologists have a really interesting term for this. They call it mind checking. It describes how some people instantly review every single interaction through this hyper-critical lens. Basically, your brain starts acting like a highly sensitive security scanner. It relentlessly sweeps your immediate memory for potential social errors. It's constantly scanning to see if you slipped up, if you missed a cue, or if you accidentally offended someone without even realizing it. A huge part of this scanning comes down to this massive fear of being misunderstood. Overthinkers know that words can be taken in a million different ways depending on context. So they constantly weigh the exact literal words they used against all the possible ways their tone might have interpreted. For example, you might have meant to sound efficient and professional in a meeting, but now your brain is totally convincing you that you actually sounded cold, blunt, and dismissive. You just agonize over that massive gap between what was said and how it might have been received. So the big takeaway here is that this intense fear causes a massive ripple effect in your everyday life. Because you keep wondering if your tone felt off, even the simplest, most casual, everyday chats end up staying in your mind significantly longer. Think about it. A waiter tells you to enjoy your meal, and you confidently reply, "You too." That completely harmless 2-second slip-up ends up living rent-free in your head for the rest of the afternoon. The conversation lingers simply because its meaning is constantly being questioned. Which brings us to Section 3, the weight of silence. You see, overthinkers absorb interactions deeply and emotionally. They internalize tiny, seemingly insignificant social cues. Your brain essentially puts a massive magnifying glass over things like a fleeting look, a brief pause before an answer, or just a really slight shift in tone. These impossibly small things stick with them long after the moment has passed. And that is exactly why, for an overthinker, conversations feel so much heavier and way more complex than they do to the average person. Let's map out how silence feels incredibly suspicious to an overthinker, especially today when communication is practically instant. Minute 1, you send a text. You feel totally fine. Minute 15, there's a delayed reply. Maybe you see the typing bubbles pop up and then disappear. Oh no. By minute 16, this weight has rapidly morphed into an intense, suffocating mental discomfort. The brain absolutely despises this uncertainty, so it desperately tries to explain it, generating these wild theories about exactly why the other person is suddenly quiet. Because the overthinking brain is wired to notice these tiny changes so quickly, normal communication variations become totally magnified. And in digital communication, where we completely lack the reassurance of tone and body language, this is a massive accelerant for anxiety. A perfectly normal, slightly delayed reply, or even a short response from a friend, can instantly feel loaded. It stops being just a busy friend tied up at work and abruptly feels like a deeply personal, targeted slight against you. Section 4, filling the gaps. The human mind absolutely hates unfinished answers. When something feels vague, the mind feels entirely denied of closure. It treats a weird text or a strange glance like a puzzle that must be solved, even if the missing pieces don't actually exist. So it keeps returning to these questions. What do they mean? Why do they say it exactly like that? It just turns into this exhausting, relentless search for absolute certainty in a situation that is fundamentally ambiguous. And this perfectly illustrates the real danger of the cycle. It always starts with an unclear detail, a gap in the story. Now, because the brain hates a vacuum, it instantly works to fill that gap. But for the overthinker, it almost always fills it with the absolute worst-case scenario. Instead of assuming they're just busy driving, the mind decides, I sounded annoying and they are deliberately ignoring me. Suddenly, a simple K text spirals completely out of control into, they hate me and we are absolutely no longer friends. Section 5, your brain's protective shield. Now, if you do this often, you're probably incredibly exhausted by it. But we need to fundamentally reframe the purpose of this habit, because it's not just about making you miserable. Here's the biggest twist from the psychology research. This agonizing mental spiral, it's not a personal flaw. It doesn't mean you're broken. It is actually your brain's misguided, ancient evolutionary attempt to shield you. Think about human history. social rejection meant being kicked out of the tribe, which literally meant a threat to your survival. Your mind isn't just busy to annoy you, it is actively trying to protect you from social rejection by hyperanalyzing every possible threat. Your brain is reacting to a weird conversation as if it's a literal survival threat. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. Understanding the deeply rooted psychology behind this spiral is a genuinely powerful tool. It finally allows us to replace our immediate anxiety with a much-needed sense of real self-compassion. So I have to ask, how will you treat yourself the next time you inevitably start overthinking? Will you continue to punish yourself for what you perceive as a flaw? Or will you take a deep breath and give yourself a little grace, knowing your brain is just working overtime, desperately trying to keep you safe in a complex social world? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I sincerely hope it helps you find a little more peace in the quiet moments following your next conversation.